So first, hello everyone, welcome. On behalf of the Higher Education Student Association here at Loyola University Chicago, I'm delighted to welcome you to our Careers in Higher Education panel. There's a lot of work that has gone on in planning for tonight, so thank you all for joining us. My name is John Oakstead. I'm the PhD Chair of the Higher Education Student Association. We have over 80 registrations for tonight's chat, and so first thing, I just really want to say thank you to my HESA colleagues for helping plan this event for tonight. There's been a lot of fun conversations and envisioning what this will look like. So thank you everyone for attending. We know it's gonna be an exciting chat as we go. So before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to keep themselves on mute during tonight's panel. Be sure to click the speaker view in the top right corner. We have all the panelist members spotlighted, so you'll be able to see them on the screen here a lot more easily. And so with that, to get us started up, I want to invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. So, and where you're tuning in from. So I know some folks have done that. We have folks from all over, from Washington, Arkansas, California. I even saw Hawaii there. I know we're a little envious of you right now here in Chicago. So thank you all for tuning in tonight. Tonight's panel consists of an incredible group of higher ed program alums and also Loyola community members. For the first part of our chat, we will have a panel discussion with all of our guests together. And then the second half, we're going to break off into two separate groups, one for a staff careers room and then one for a faculty careers room. But don't worry, we'll be recording tonight's chat, so we'll follow up tomorrow with a link to the webinar, so you won't miss out on any of the good stories or any of the good content. So we'll be sure to follow up with that. This conversation will be moderated by Dr. Lorenzo Baber. Dr. Baber is an associate professor and program chair of the higher education program here at Loyola University Chicago. Dr. Baber joined the faculty at Loyola in 2019 after previously holding tenure-line faculty appointments at Iowa State University and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Additionally, Dr. Baber has previously served as an administrator in undergraduate admissions, multicultural affairs, and residence life. So I'll now pass it over to Dr. Baber, who can begin this conversation with our panelists.
All right, good evening, everyone, or afternoon for those of us joining in from Hawaii or the West Coast. Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to also give my kudos to the HESA organization. They've been wonderful in their support. I know we also have a number of prospective students on the call that I saw. So this is the community that we've developed and we continue to maintain. So just want to acknowledge that, as well as the folks from across the country who may not have graduated from Loyola, but have connections, and welcome. And we look forward to bringing you in to our community as well, not only tonight, but in the future. For me, it's an honor and privilege to be the steward of this program and the history, and continuing on that history as a program that elevates emerging scholars and practitioners to be engaged in social justice practices in whatever career paths they pursue. So I know we have a lot of great narratives that are going to come out. So I think we should just go ahead and get started. So I want to first start out with a question. Have each of the panelists introduce themselves, their name, their pronouns, where they attended university, where they are working now, and summarize how you got into the field of higher education. Anyone can start. I see Dr. Gardner there, so I'm just going to go ahead and have my colleague, as we shared a class not last night, so yeah. Dr. Gardner is very good at getting us started and setting a wonderful tone. So please.
Low-key, I feel like we all should have did this, looked at each other on the screen. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for bringing us into the space. John and the HESA board, y'all are doing amazing work throughout this year. My name is Paige, she, her pronouns. I currently work at Loyola University as an assistant dean here at Loyola University Chicago. As an assistant dean and care case manager. So that means I do a lot of crisis management with undergrad and graduate students. And then it's been an honor to be able to adjunct in the HESA program. I got to teach a course alongside of Hilary. It was fun to collaborate with her. And then also this semester with Lorenzo. So that's been pretty amazing. In terms of like short and sweet story, oh, it was about mentoring, right? A story about mentoring from a woman of color, and it's the coming of age story. No, I'm just kidding. But basically, I was coming out, learning a lot about who I am, learning about my passions, and a mentor really saw greatness in me and kind of helped guide me along the way. And if you all don't know yet, student affairs is all about like families and little tribes that exist like over generations. And so a mentor knew a faculty member, and I got connected to Seattle University. That's where I got my master's, and then that's where I started the journey. I'm a Res Life baby, so started there. I've done multicultural affairs for an extended period of time, and then now in the dean's office. So that's my short and sweet, but there's so much more in there. Yeah. Popcorn, Norma.
Ah. All right, thank you.
Nice move, Paige. I like that. My name is Norma Lopez, and I go by she, her, ella pronouns. I graduated with Paige, although we just did it like this on Zoom because we graduated not that long ago. So I currently teach as contingent faculty at Northern Illinois University. I am a full-time instructor there, so I teach 4 classes and try to keep up with my own research on the side, and still do some research with my dissertation chair, Dimitri Morgan, who teaches at Loyola. So still see a lot of people, John regularly, just met with him today. And so I'm still really connected to Loyola in that way. So my story is interesting. I got into higher ed probably twice now because my first stint was in student affairs for about 20 years. I went to college on the East Coast, and it was a rough transition for me. I grew up in Chicago, I grew up in Pilsen, and going to school out east at a predominantly white institution was tough for me. So I knew that I wanted to go into education once I dropped a pre-med major, and I ended up working in admissions, in academic advising, in res life, in orientation, in a college access program at the end. And so eventually I always joke that I sort of had a midlife crisis after I turned 40 and wanted to pursue a PhD. So that was a little bit of a different experience in that it was much more about me and about my interest in really sitting with some of the issues that I'd encountered in the 20 years I'd worked in higher ed. And so I wanted to really focus on various inequities that I had experienced myself and then sort of helped students through. But I wanted to have that time to really think about them and research and read about them and research them. And so I really love what I do now, but I also really loved that I did that first. And I always say that you can always, get a second chance at something new, or you're never too old to learn new tricks. That's me. I'm going to popcorn it over to Hilary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hilary Zimmerman, and I use she, her pronouns. I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Minnesota and my master's degree at Indiana University, and then my PhD at UCLA. But I have connections to Loyola as I have taught sort of adjunct in both the HESA program as well as the international higher ed program. And a little bit in the leadership minor when it existed too. So I've been doing some adjunct work ever since I moved to Chicago back in 2016. As far as how I got into higher ed, I never worked in residence life. I'm one of the few people with a student affairs background who has not been in the residence halls, although I have deep respect for people who can do that. I actually came up through the fraternity and sorority life arm, and then I did a lot in student conduct for a while. And so that's sort of how I fell into higher ed. I really saw, I don't know if I would have articulated this at the time, but I saw college and the undergraduate experience as a really cool learning lab for leadership. And that's one of the things I studied in my PhD program was leadership and sort of the democratic purposes of higher education and all these like really important lofty things. Never could have articulated that at the time, but that's how I got into higher ed and why I got into higher ed. I started off undergrad as a math major, which dropped out real quick, but sort of explains why I'm at where I'm at. I now work in the provost's office and do all kinds of statsy things with surveys and research. And I help Loyola make sure that they're making, well, I provide the data to help Loyola make sure that people are making data-informed decisions. I can't always control the decisions that they make, but that is where I'm at for now. I'm looking forward to talking with you all more. And I will popcorn it to Christina.
Hey everyone, Christina Yao, she, her, hers pronouns. Excited to be here. This is one of the perks, I guess, of being in a pandemic, right? That everything's virtual and I can come visit with my alma mater from South Carolina, where it is warm and typically very sunny and there's no snow. So it's amazing. I did my undergrad at Marquette University. Very involved in student affairs, doing things like orientation, multicultural student affairs, and like Dr. Paige said, there was a mentor who was like, you can do this full time and make money doing this. He didn't say how little money, but he said I could make money doing it. So applied and that Jesuit connection and ended up at Loyola. So I graduated from the master's program in 2002. So it's coming up almost 20 years, right? So I guess, yeah. So next year will be my 20th anniversary of getting my master's degree, which is I'm old, right? I'm old. So, but I'm here. So it's great. And then did work in residence life at Southern Methodist University and Washington University in St. Louis. And it got to a point where I realized I could not advance that much further without having a terminal degree. And so ended up doing my PhD at Michigan State University. And after about a year there, realized I wanted to join the dark side of faculty. And so I was faculty for about 5 years at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And then now I am here at the University of South Carolina as an assistant professor. And I'm also the program coordinator for our higher education and student affairs master's program. So very excited to be here with everyone and excited to learn from everybody. Anthony.
All right. I don't even know how you I don't know how I come after that, right? Like, what story do I tell? No, I'm just kidding. Super happy to be here with you all and sharing space this evening. So my name is Anthony Sis. I use they, them pronouns. Currently work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion learning consultant at Cornell University. So, so how I started, I'm also alum of the program too. I graduated 2017. And so immediately after graduating, I took on a position at the University of Miami as their first ever assistant director for their LGBTQ center. Was there for about almost 2 years and then realized I wanted to do a transition shift, but not dramatically. So I currently work at a university, but I'm now housed in human resources. But a lot of the work that I do really stems honestly from my experience working at Loyola as a graduate assistant in the Student Diversity Multicultural Affairs office with now Dr. Paige. So, it's always nice to see these networks connect. But my story, similar, I think, to really Christina's, and as well as what other people shared, was that somebody told me I could do this work for a full-time living when I was an undergrad. Didn't really quite believe them, but I also wasn't 100% set on the idea of going to school kind of back to back as an undergraduate student. So I am also a Posse scholar. So shout out to any Posse scholars that are out there. But really, through that program and through that experience, it allowed me to go to Connecticut. So I went to undergrad in Connecticut College, small liberal arts college in New London. And so I see a few people who are like, yeah, Connecticut. So really transformational experience. And then that's when somebody introduced me. One of my mentors, really good friends as well. Her name is Melanie Pagan. She's an assistant dean at Columbia University now, but she kind of posed this idea about student affairs, higher education. She's like, you're just so great with connecting with people. You should, be a mentor and pay it forward to other students. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good, but I wasn't like 100% set on it. So I did take a year in between and I decided to explore other options. But one of the things I knew was that I was really passionate about education, and I was considering becoming a teacher, particularly within the K through 12 system at one point. And so through that particular kind of interest, I was able to do like a Fulbright. So I did a Fulbright and taught English in Portugal for a year. And that experience really solidified me wanting to go back to grad school, specifically working with college students. And then that's when I looked at Loyola's program. And I will say that one of the things that really stood out with Loyola's program is that the focus on higher education and not specifically student affairs was what really piqued my interest. And so, yeah, I wanted to learn about the student affairs experience, but being able to take courses such as public policy in higher education, learning about kind of the governance of higher education as an institution was what really interested me. And I took a lot of courses that were not student affairs specific. And so, I say that to say that even if you do have an interest in higher education, it's such a complex organization that you can really kind of use the learnings that you take from a higher ed experience, or particularly with my experience within the Loyola program, to really apply it to anything else, either within higher education or also outside of it too. And so that's what really then kind of transitioned and inspired me to look at positions outside of student affairs. And that's currently where I'm at. So in addition to the pay, because I will say it did come with a huge salary boost transitioning over from student affairs to human resources, I think what I love about my current role is just really the broader focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly. So through SDMA, for example, that approach around intersectionality, and with the programming I was doing there, with the outreach that I was doing with students, that's what really kind of introduced me to what this concept looked like in action. And then just being able to do that in my current role and being able to use creative mediums, but also with adults, it's kind of where, my passion really lies, and just educating people about the importance of these topics, not just from a emotional lens or from a student lens, but really from a more broader approach. So I'll end it there, but that's my story.
Great start, great stories, great trajectories. It's just amazing to hear all the diverse ways that you all kind of came to higher ed. And of course, I have to give a shout out to Loyola. Loyola truly is everywhere, right? So we got Cornell, we got NIU, we got USC, the real USC down in South Carolina, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just a beautiful way. And thank you, Anthony, for connecting your program experience to your initial, and the ways in which it allowed you to be a little bit more flexible in terms of where you started in the field. So the follow-up question is, obviously higher education is not is a very diverse program area, and so the transition is not as seamless as we'd like to think it is, right? So can you talk a little bit about your biggest learning curve as you joined the workforce full-time in higher education? And what did you learn in that as part of that learning curve as an opportunity for you to grow and grow as a professional? Those kind of those initial opportunities, those initial learning curves. And anyone can start.
I can pop in real quick. I still remember, obviously graduated almost 20 years ago from my master's, but I remember my very first job, and that transition was a really big deal. And the reason why is because that was the moment when I realized that working in higher education and student affairs is not always just, oh, we have to do what's right for the student. We have to focus on the student. It's all about the student. It's also, I need to do my job. Right. And so coming to terms with that and realizing like, oh, when I'm in my department meetings and stuff, like how much do I fight and how much do I push? And also realizing, especially coming out as a new professional, that there's still a lot that I needed to learn. But ultimately, it was always that reminding myself of like, oh, okay. So it's not all about like student development theory and all the Honestly, sometimes some of the fun stuff that we learned in the classroom, but it's also like, oh, I need to deal with some pretty major stuff. And no matter what, there's a lot of times where I have to do what my employer tells me to do, even though to me, it might not be as student-centered. So that was a very quick realization I had in that very first semester.
To build off of that, I also remember that first transition. I was transitioning from being an assistant resident director to a full-time resident director. And I was charged up. I was excited. I was ready to change the world. I was coming out of a Jesuit higher ed department. So I was like, yes, we're going to do this transformative justice. And so what I learned is that it was a great reminder that the change that I was seeking, right, was fast-paced, and the institution itself moves much slower when it comes to the change. So what I really had to bring into the space was to build from the ground up. And what that meant was building community, right? Like connecting with other staff across campus, building my system of support so that I can actually start to implement the change that I was seeking. So the first year, it was about building community with the other RDs, understanding the students that I'm working with, also showing them that I'm invested. So I got involved. I was advising some student organizations. My background, though I was in residence life, very much so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I was specifically hired to oversee one of the learning communities, which was the Black Scholars Hall, which had deep roots, deep tradition in I was at UC Santa Barbara. So I was in a hall called Santa Rosa, and all kinds of pride. But anyway, I had to show them that I was invested. So it was important to not only be involved with the student groups that were connected to residence life, but to actually show up for the Black Student Union, to assist another organization that wanted to start within the Black community called Black Queer, which was for Black queer folks, and like really talking about what it's like to feel invisible within a space that you're seeking safety and affirmation from, right? So I was able to kind of connect to the things that were represented in my own intersecting identities. I was able to do a conference as a result of that. So I just started kind of building and contributing to the community where I saw need. But a lot of that came from having to make those connections with staff so that I had resources, so that I had people who could vouch for me, or people that I trusted and then could connect students directly to those individuals. So I would encourage you all to think about that when you enter into the workforce, really thinking about how you're going to build that community and kind of fill the need that your students might be looking for.
I think one of the things I learned in kind of early in my first role was boundaries. So I graduated from undergrad and I worked for 2 years in a pretty intense consulting gig where I was basically like working all the time or I was sleeping. Like those were the two things I did. And I did that for 2 years. And then I went and got my master's degree and went straight through to my PhD. So I had basically 7 straight years of schooling again. And then when it came time for me to get back into the workforce after I had my PhD, I had a newborn. So I gave birth to a child 10 days after I defended my dissertation. So there was just a lot I had to set boundaries, and I learned about new boundaries, and I'm still kind of navigating all of that. And I think honestly, like figuring out your boundaries is just always a work in progress. But I learned a lot about like what those boundaries were for me. And I think when I was in both my master's and PhD program, there was always something to be doing. Like there was always an article to read. There was always a research project I could volunteer on. There was always classwork. And then when there wasn't classwork, there was like dissertation work and thinking and all this energy to be spent on just there was always something to do. And when I got to my first full-time job, I had to kind of accept that like there needed to be boundaries around my workday and figure out how to still be productive and make the impact that I wanted to make and be a good teammate and be somebody in the office that people could rely on. But also know that I had a family and a life, and I wanted that balance back in my life again. And so, yeah, sort of navigating some of those boundaries, learning that no, thank you is a complete sentence, and that's all that needs to be said. So those were some of the things I learned early on, and I'm still kind of navigating, but probably the biggest learning curve for me.
I thought Hilary was going to talk about different boundaries, so so I'll talk about the ones I was thinking about. And I think it's because of where Christina and Paige sort of were going with their learning in their first job. So I had to think I had to think for quite a while. My first job in admissions was in 1995. So it was quite a while ago. And I feel like I'm a different person at this point, but I think some of my earliest boundary settings were around issues of equity, right? So I've been really involved in those kinds of issues in different areas in higher ed. And so I would take things really personally when they didn't go the way I had hoped, or when students really seemed to be suffering from decisions that a university had made or a staff person had made. And so I just realized at a certain point that that was affecting my mental health, and that I needed to, one, have boundaries, but two, also engage in some self-care so that I didn't feel burnt out by the issues that my students were feeling. And so a lot of times walking a student through or supporting a student through some of those issues, it felt like I was living through it myself. And so I think in those early jobs, those were some of the hardest things to do. And I sort of have found a balance there. And so it's not sort of the issue that I deal with the most now, but I would say in my first jobs, that was definitely it. And I know I'm an empath. So part of that is that that's just who I am. And so hopefully I hope to never be rid of that, because I hope that my students see that when they talk to me, but I also need to be able to pull back in a certain way at a certain time. But yeah, that's where I thought Hilary's going. But I think those other boundaries are good too. No, thank you is a complete sentence.
Yeah, so to just echo everything that's been said, I'll just add that I got really spoiled when I was working at Loyola, in the sense that it was a positive working environment. It was just like an overall loving, embracing environment to really thrive in, and to really find kind of my own purpose, and to find the work that I was doing to have impact. And I really underestimated the importance of that for me when I got into my first role, because when I got into my first role, my first supervisor left within about a year or so when I was in that position. And so in that, there were a lot of transitions in terms of leadership, in terms of structure. So I think the biggest learning curve that I would just add to that for me was, how do I survive in a not so healthy work environment or organization? Um, and I feel very strongly that, if you're not being valued or appreciated where you currently work, and this is not just unique to higher education, I would argue it's, kind of across the board, across any organization or company, but especially when you're working with students, when you are putting in those long hours and stuff, the last thing you want to do is not feel like you have that institutional support for the work that you're doing. And so that was a huge learning curve for me in my first role. And I would say not entirely the reason why I left, but definitely a large part of the reason why I left was because of that, and not necessarily because of the students. But the way I put it to my students was that you should also, like, I hope in me leaving, it served as an example that if a company or organization doesn't value the work that you do or the impact that you're having, that you don't necessarily need to feel stuck working there. And now I think coming to understand, especially within the context of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, that for some people that's just not a possibility. And I understand that. And that's a very real thing, that some people just can't easily jump and go to another organization or another higher ed institution. But because I had the privilege to do so, and I was able to do it in a way that was strategic, that also didn't negatively impact the students, and also the relationships I had built in that current role, that was just something that was really hard to kind of navigate, both personally when thinking about mental well-being, and then just overall well-being, right? I mean, we live in a capitalist society still, and as many was mentioned earlier in the conversation, like money is a big deal. I was living in an expensive city, and the income that I was making wasn't significant. The position that I currently have, it came with a huge salary boost with a cost of living that was significantly less than living in a major city. So I say that because I think, yeah, you know, we don't have that conversation a lot about money and income and the importance of it, but it really is in order for you to be able to just meet basic needs. And so that's something that I learned pretty quickly, I would say within those 2 years in my first full-time role.
Great. Thank you so much. So it sounds like some of the themes I heard in terms of your initial learning curve was just kind of balancing, kind of continue to elevate your forms of resistance to support equity, inclusion, justice, while also understanding there's a professionalization now that standard that you have to adhere to. I also heard a lot about boundary setting and being sure, particularly as a early or mid-career person, being sure that you have the stance to protect your time, protect your space, and particularly as it relates to well-being, and then the scaffolding of, you know, we live in a patriarchal, capitalist, heteronormative, racist, sexist society. So how do you continue to engage that while holding on to all these things as an early career person, particularly if you're in an environment that kind of pushes you towards those norms and you want to resist. So I think those are all great lessons, and I appreciate you all sharing your stories. The next question is, you know, a lot of us come into this field because we've had either great experiences as students or early, we like working with students. So I'm wondering, in general, what's your most rewarding part of your day? I'd like you to address that. But also, how do you stay connected with students and their concerns in your position, especially if you're not seeing students or communicating with students in an everyday way through class, through your work, through other things? How do you maintain that student-centered stance?
I can answer mine. My answers for both are probably the same. My favorite part of the day is, although it's a little harder during the pandemic, but it's when a class goes really well. It's like when it just feels like everybody's engaged, everybody's excited. There's not as much that, you know, there's a certain kind of energy to the movement of a classroom that I'm missing. But sometimes you can get it still, I think, in an online class. It is just, I think it takes more work on everybody's part. And so that's really hard. And I try to be really understanding, because I know that I'm tired of being online. My kids are tired of being online. We're all tired of being on a Zoom, having our cameras on, all of it, you know, it's hard and it's draining. And so I completely understand that. But when it does go well, it's just really exciting, and it's really fun. And that's also, I think, how I stay connected. Although I think probably the best way to stay connected for me is when I meet individually with students, and then I can really get a sense of how they're doing and what's important to them.
I'll say for me, well, it's interesting because my current role, like I don't focus solely on students, but I still do a lot of engagement with students. And I think also understanding that the work that I do for staff specifically, so at Cornell, we have over 8,000 staff members. And so from a diversity lens, what I think I didn't realize, having kind of my background and be mostly in student affairs, was just how diverse staff can be too, when you're thinking about people who work in facilities, union workers, federal contractors, right? Like all of these different populations, even within the university, and how disproportionately a lot of the people who work in dining, who work in facilities, are mostly people of color. And so I'm constantly thinking about, like, how do I cater my services and the offerings that I do within my current role to some of those positions, because those aren't your traditional 9 to 5, right? So they can't attend a training that I do at 3 p.m. because they have to be preparing for dinner for the rush of students coming in around dinner time, right? So how am I thinking about like accessibility from that lens and that perspective, but also just knowing that when I do have those moments and opportunities to connect with people across different units, that like the trickle down effect will be that it'll also impact the student experience. If they're learning about the importance of unconscious biases or microaggressions or talking about allyship, that it's not just for them specifically, but I know it's going to shift culture in some degree, whether it happens during my time here or not, around how they also then engage with students. So just hearing the impact, and I talked about this in my previous response, that just knowing that I'm having an impact and hearing that impact, whether it's through like a podcast that I do or a training, and somebody takes the time to just simply send an email to be like, hey, what you shared and what, you know, the lesson that you taught me in this particular workshop was so meaningful and impactful, that definitely lightens up my day. And just knowing, like I said, that it will have an impact on students. And with the kind of student post question, I mean, I still work a lot with graduate students because at Cornell, there are some resources for graduate and professional students, but not a whole ton, especially in the DEI space. So a lot of them also tend to be like teachers, assistants, or they're also, you know, doing some other research with staff members or faculty members. So that's kind of how I squeeze them into my trainings, to say like, if you just get one staff person on there, like that'll be enough to just validate why I should do this training. Or if at least if you extend the invitation to staff, because the more the better, right? Especially in this virtual environment, because we don't have to worry about space. We don't have to worry about reserving a space. And so it definitely increases accessibility for a lot of other populations. And so that's how I kind of get a sense of what my impact is. And just hearing those emails or getting those emails and those messages really means a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I think my joy has grown over the years as I get wiser. I think starting out in res life, but then also moving into multicultural affairs at Loyola, yes, I centered, a lot of my joy came from interaction with students and seeing the light bulbs go off and the aha moments, and really helping students feel empowered and like figuring out how to navigate this institution, historically white institution that was not designed for them to succeed, right? But the newfound joy for me right now is actually turning my attention to the new professionals who are joining the field. So it's been, I think, really important to me to reach out to particularly women of color and queer folks who are coming into the field, making them feel welcomed, finding space for us to be in community with one another so that we can sustain ourselves and retain each other, because oftentimes it's not the institution that's committed to retaining staff who hold, you know, marginalized identities, intersecting marginalized identities, all of the above. So I'm really in, and when I was in the PhD program, really focused my research around how women of color navigate historically white spaces. And from that, so many great things have come from it. And that's a big source of my community. That's what keeps me connected, grounded, and inspired when I know that I have folks that I can lean on, that I can go to vent or to learn from, safely vent, because not everybody is someone you can vent with. But like, you know, you gotta know who your system of support crew is. And so those are things that have brought me joy now, like not just also giving back to students, but also to new professionals and folks trying to move and groove in the field. I would also say with students, now that I'm in the office of the Dean of Students, I have to be intentional about reaching out to students and being with them. Right now, a lot of my work is crisis management oriented. So I'm like connecting with students who are experiencing trauma inside and outside of the classroom. So what's important for me to do, and what I've seen modeled by faculty mentors and colleagues of mine, great colleagues, is going and showing up into the SDMA space, signing up to be a formal mentor. This year, I think, was the first year that, and Anthony, this is a shout out, the Q Initiative now has a mentorship program. And so I've always been a mentor in one of the mentorship programs, but this year I've brought the talents to Quest, which has been amazing. So again, like I have to find and seek those spaces to affirm students and to also say, hey, we made it to the DOS office. So like you have someone who you can actually connect to or look to for support if you feel you're not getting what you need. So that's been pretty exciting to discover that too.
So my job is a bit more removed from people in general, students, faculty, and or staff. So I work in the Office for Institutional Effectiveness, and basically my job is to gather and analyze data about things, whatever institutional question that people have. And so I think for me, my goal is always I'm one of the few people in our office who has a higher ed or a student affairs background. I'm like running through everyone in our office. I'm one of the few people that do. And so it is always my goal, and it makes my heart happy when people understand that all these data points represent like real people, that they represent real humans. And I take very seriously when people fill out a survey and share their perspective with me, and I try to make space for their agency and their voice to come through in our surveys and represent that fairly. And so those are when I get to do those things, and when I feel like that message has come across, those are the most kind of fulfilling parts of my day, and things that I look forward to the most. And that's also how I stay connected with the student perspective the most. They're literally like telling me what their perspective is through the data that we have about them.
Dr. Yao, did you want to chime
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, just real quick, just from the perspective as a faculty member, my connection with students is different than what it was, pre-PhD, right? And Lorenzo, you could obviously speak to this as well, is that, the students that I work with now are graduate students, master's and doctoral students. And so, when I think about the work that I do with them, my joy comes in the fact that I'm trying to produce or influence or whatever, very critical people, right? Critical new professionals as master's students, and then as doctoral students as critical researchers and critical thinkers and everything, right? In the work that they do and everything, especially when you think about their dissertations and then moving on and everything. And so for me, we always talk a lot about in higher education and student affairs, like, oh, what's your impact? What's your impact on undergraduate students? My impact on undergraduate students is the preparation that I try to provide for the new professionals coming out, right? So the master's students, the doctoral students and everything. And for me, the joy comes is when they're just like, oh my gosh, like, I never thought about that. And I'm like, you didn't? That's a surprise, but let's talk about that, right? Or think about like, I thought about what we did in class. And then when I was in my, my GA, I said this and I did this, and they really thought it was a great idea. And they just never thought about that either. And I'm like, great, let's keep doing that and everything. So, so to me, that's where the joy comes from, right? Like it shifts a lot from being a professional as an administrator into what I do now as a faculty, but it's great. It's a good life.
Thank you so much. And we have about 8 or 9 more minutes, and I want to ask one final question for this group, and I know we'll break out into more specific paths, but obviously we're living in a time where things are changing literally by the second, right? So we have obviously a pandemic, we have renewed calls for racialized justice, we have hyper capitalism. I can go on and on and on, and students know I will, but I digress. So if you could just think back about your earliest self as a scholar, or excuse me, as a professional scholar practitioner, what advice would you give yourself for this world in this time in the higher education context? What skills, what advice would you give yourself in terms of navigating all these things that are happening both on our campus, but also outside our campus, but obviously have an impact on our everyday lives as professionals?
One thing I would have told myself as a younger professional, or even just, yesterday, is to really, keep the receipts, right? We're what's great right now, great and not so great sometimes, is that we're in a society where with social media, the internet, all of that stuff, everything is very public. And for me, especially with all the stuff that's going on this past year, especially related to racial injustice, is that think about how many of your institutions, your supervisor, your department put out statements saying Black Lives Matter, we support Black lives, we are anti-racist and everything. I think, this is a great time. And what I would have done back in the day is pull up those statements, when you're trying to make push for things related to equity and justice and say, hey, we publicly stated this, right? Or even say like, this is what we say is our mission statement. This is what we said we need to do. What exactly are we doing and how are we going to do it, right? I'm committed to the cause. I will help out with it, but let's talk about what this means, and especially as a way to hold leadership accountable for things that they say they will do.
My advice, I think, I mean, I don't know if it'd be so much advice, but I think it's more of just like to my younger self, I would have been like, you did good, right? So part of the reason, and the why I say that is only because I feel like I've been doing a lot of this DEI specific work or along like different realms. I initially kind of started focusing on the DEI lens with public health, HIV prevention work, which then transitioned over to my role as an educator, as a scholar practitioner within higher ed. But I really feel like in particular, shameless plug with the Loyola program is that when I came in, it really allowed me to really understand what that theory looked like in practice with the work I was doing within SDMA. And so I think about my grad school experience just kind of being that encapsulating moment where I was like, oh, okay, like I'm not wild for thinking that everyone deserves justice and that accessibility should be important and that intersectionality should be a thing, right? Because the work I was doing in SDMA allowed me to put that into practice and that we could live in a world where like all of those things actually coincided with one another, right? And that nobody was actually left out of the picture. And so through my education and through just my lived experiences and just continuing to educate myself about these newer issues that are coming up, I really don't think I could have chosen a better route for just understanding that like times will always change and the language will always change around inclusion, around equity, around, what were we talking about, anti-racism. But anti-racism, I think that's a lot more of a more in-depth conversation that nobody is really truly ready to have, and no matter what your organization's saying. And so Cornell, we're not pushing anti-racism, but we're also being intentional about that because it requires a substantial amount of work that people really aren't ready for at a personal level, let alone at an organizational level. So we're intentional with not really pushing that framework too far, just because we know that requires a lot more work on the equity and the inclusion end before we even get to the anti-racism piece. And so I'll just say that, I think I did good for myself and just continuing to learn. And I think that's the biggest key with all of this is being able to open to learn more about the world, about yourself, and then being able to put it into the work that you do.
Yeah, anyone else? Hilary, thank you.
I would tell myself, and hopefully there's some sort of transferability for you all, to like get myself a journal, a buddy, a counselor, a support group, something, a friend who I can talk to, just something along those lines to get myself out of my own head a little bit and kind of do some external processing and figure out how to kind of cope with the world in those ways and take care of kind of centering myself first, and then work on kind of centering relationships with each other and with kind of our societal context that we're in. So that's probably what I would have told myself and should tell myself every day.
I love that, and I want to build on it. So I want to leave folks with, do not tie your self-worth to the work that you are doing. That is the worst spiral to go down. And also, I also want to normalize it too. It might happen your first time in the field. It's really, we are in a field that socializes us to be in service to others. We are affirmed when our students like feel that we're putting in the hours and the time and the energy with them. The university gives you awards for, who's working the hardest, who stayed the longest, right? So there's this pressure to have to give so much of yourself in order to be seen as like doing excellent work. And I want to say that that is a false notion, especially for folks who are holding intersecting marginalized identities. And we all hold intersecting identities, okay? So everyone's included in that, but particularly for folks of color and queer folks, where we are asked to not only do our job, but be a representative for the groups that we belong to, the identity groups that we belong to be a safe space for the students who don't have a place on campus or don't feel connected or don't feel a sense of belonging. And so all of a sudden, your job can turn into this tumultuous terrain that's hard to navigate. And people are like gaslighting you and saying, yes, this is like great. And like, keep doing this. And we want to keep you here. So like, you know, maybe not the promotion this time, but next time, you know. And again, like talking about, you know, knowing your worth and compensation and things like that. We could talk about this in the breakouts, but I just want to make sure that we like detangle that. And it took me a long time to do it. And the way that I combated it was by actually finding things to do in my life that bring me joy. Work does not have to be the thing that's going to be my saving grace or make me proud. Like I don't have to be proud of my institution to do meaningful work, right? So I found a queer Black church, and choir rehearsal was like something that I wasn't missing ever. So no events. I'm not going to events during this time period. I also have an amazing therapist who's helped me through the PhD experience, but I really should have been doing it when I was in the master's program. So I get a therapist because, and then that time is sacred as well, where I will not overlap with work. And that's how you kind of do some of the things that Norma and Hilary were talking about in terms of setting boundaries, where you have to say like, I'm not available at this time. Dear students, I'm working from 9 to 5, or occasionally we might have this program, but that's not the norm for me to be here every night from 7 to 9 p.m. on top of my 9 to 5. So, and it's tricky. You will learn over time how to make that work for you, how to set those boundaries. So don't feel bad either. If that's not something you feel like you can do, you grow into that and you get real fierce about your time as you continue to like move forward in the career. So that is, I'm sorry, I'll get off the soapbox.
That's great. I know we're, Norma, please. And
I'm just going to add a quick thing. I will agree with Paige, and I will say that I have things in my calendar that that are important for me, for my mental health. And if somebody asks to meet with me or anything around those times, I say, I'm sorry, I am previously engaged. And it could be yoga. Don't care. It's on my calendar. It is not moving. And that's the way you have to do it, because it is sacred time. So my time with my kids, my time with my family. If I'm going out for a run, I'm going to tell you it is the most important meeting of my day. Call me a liar. Don't care. I will say that thinking about this question brought up a lot of feelings about, I was an assistant dean at my alma mater when 9/11 happened. And I think that when the pandemic started, that was sort of what ran through my mind. And the first thing that I thought that I remembered sort of learning from that time was to be student-centered. And so that was what really helped me, right? Is that I was in the middle of teaching a bunch of classes, and the first thing I said was, these aren't normal times, and I don't expect normal behavior, and I don't expect us to keep to the normal schedule. I think that it goes, to what Paige said about self-care as a student. These are my students, and I know that I can help with their self-care if I'm understanding of what we're all going through. And millions of people have gotten sick, and hundreds of thousands of people have died, and they are not numbers, they are real people. And so this has been a really tough time for everyone, right? So whether you're concerned about being out on the street because you're Black, or you're concerned about going grocery shopping because you have a compromised immune system, I think this is just important to always remember that these are scary times, and to just give people a little bit of grace. And I haven't seen that all the time during the past year, and it's been unfortunate, I think.
Well, I want to give thank you, Norma. I want to give honor to Dr. Lopez. I want to give honor to our time and our subgroups, but I just want to quickly say that, again, as someone who represents the program, we are incredibly proud of you as alums, as colleagues, in the ways that you represent your program, and the ways that you not only set the world on fire, but reimagine it with a loving embrace through your presence and everyday practice. So thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing to have this dialogue both in our breakout groups and as we move forward. So with that, I will turn it over to John, I believe.
Yep, awesome. Well, I'm not even gonna try to compete with any of that because I'm just gonna keep the ship moving here. So thanks everyone. So now at this point, we're going to go into 2 different breakout groups. And with that, so we have a staff careers room and then a faculty careers. Again, reminder, don't worry, we're gonna follow up after with a recording. So do not worry, pick a room that you're feeling, wanna drive with tonight, and you can watch the rest tomorrow, with some popcorn. So we have in the staff careers, we have Dr. Gardner, Anthony, and Dr. Zimmerman. And then in the faculty careers, we have Dr. Baber, Dr. Lopez, and Dr. Yao. At this time, we're gonna be pretty organic as we have a smaller group here, but allowing opportunity for our panelists to field any questions from any of you that you might have had from their talks earlier. But maybe I think just to get us kicked off in this conversation, I'm gonna ask my first question. And so this is for, the faculty here. And so question for you is that, many of you have had actually all of you have had other professional roles before going into the faculty route. What do you think is the biggest difference between being a staff member and a faculty member? And, with that, like what's the biggest difference, but what's the, and what's the biggest challenge there, and how have you kind of navigated your way through that?
I mean, one thing I think is honestly a big perk of being faculty is that to a certain extent, I kind of dictate my own schedule, right? And it's not quite as strict where I need to be in my office, the 8:30 to 5 and everything, which for me is very important. I very much value that. I think a big difference also is that as a staff member, as an administrator, is that I was doing the work of the university, right? Like, this is your job, here's your job description, this needs to happen, whether it's the residence halls or advising students or whatever and stuff, or supervising people. Whereas as a faculty member, I think what's kind of nice, and I'll put it out there, right? And I think this depends on the type of faculty position you have. I think it depends on, maybe even if you have tenure or not, if you're promoted, the type of institution that you're at and everything. But for me, what I find very different when I started this was that I kind of had to be kind of an entrepreneur. And I almost felt like, to a certain extent, I was working for myself because I was working towards tenure, right? Like, I definitely had my classes that I had to teach, but I still had a little leeway in how I taught it and the content and everything like that. My own research agenda was my own research agenda. And then, obviously I had my service and everything, but it got to a point where I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm like an entrepreneur and I'm like hustling to get tenure. Like, I'm trying to think strategically about even the service that I'm involved in, or, reviewing for journals or doing things like that. But that was probably a big shift, I think, that I thought was the biggest difference.
For me, I'm new to this particular experience in teaching, and I'm contingent faculty at NIU. So Dimitri, I'm going to ask him for help because he knows I'm terrible with sports analogies, but I think I would be like, I feel like a free agent, right? Because I'm not tenure track anywhere. So is that right? I'm a free agent. I don't know. Yeah. I'm really terrible with sports analogies, but I was like, I know there's one out there that I can use. And so I totally feel what Christina's saying about that. So I feel that a little bit, but like, I'm on my own right now. I'm trying to figure it out. But I think what's been really different, because I teach a bunch of classes right now, and I compare it to my last job where I really built relationships with students individually. I was an academic advisor at the University of Chicago for 6 years. I met with, I had hundreds of advisees, probably over 300. And I lived with students in the residence hall. That was another 100. And so I had a captive audience. They had to meet with me. It was required. And so it was one by one by one. So I met with them individually. And then to sort of adjust to having kind of a relationship within a group, within a class, and a cohort in particular. All of our doc students and our master students are cohorted. So to do that, I don't know, it was a really different experience. And I at first wasn't sure if I was enjoying it. Like I liked the energy and and how dynamic a classroom is, but I wasn't sure if I enjoyed like how the relationship was playing out. Now that I've been there about a year and a half, I've started to develop individual relationships with students. So I see now that it was sort of because I was new, and that was and it was different in that way. But now that I have these relationships that I'm developing with them individually, it feels a little bit more like my previous job in that way.
Yeah, for me, I see a lot of alignments. I came up through Res Life, like some on the other call, and I learned a lot about multitasking. I learned a lot. It's similar where you have a lot of unstructured time, like in terms of it's not a 9-to-5 job. And it really is part-time researcher, part-time teacher, part-time service. Like it really does align with those things. So a lot of the things that I carry with me in my faculty career, I learned a lot from my Res Life days, even like, you know, just being able to stay calm through kind of turbulent times, though that's getting less and less of a skill. It's eroding, but just because you never know what was going to happen. And really, like my whole thing was in Res Life was like, if nobody's like injured or dying, like it's going to be fine. Like, and that's kind of like the attitude I had. It's the attitude I've carried. Like, you know, there's just certain hills that you want to stand on, but a lot of stuff you just got to let slide, and so you can focus on the most important things. So I think that is one thing that I've carried with me through the transition in my career.
Awesome. So then open, obviously, of course, open to the rest. So if any folks have other questions that they would like to ask. Yeah, go for it, Cynthia.
I actually, I do have a question. Hi, Dr. Lopez. So I'm looking at the different like titles, like adjunct, instructor, contingent faculty, and then more so like, so I was told kind of the negatives of being an adjunct, and if you're there for too long, then you will never become an assistant professor. It's become like, so let's just say I do want to be a faculty member. I graduate with my PhD and I want to come out. Like, is there a reason why you want to be a free agent, Dr. Lopez, or should I gun for assistant professor? I guess I'm getting a little confused. Like, what should I want? Like your goal or your dream, and then, what should you, like, how long could I be an adjunct for, or am I making sense?
You are totally making sense. Yeah. And I don't know what you should go for. I can't tell you that. What I can say is why I did what I did, which is that I am limited and I can't just apply to jobs all over the country and fly off and move to wherever. So for that reason, I am limited in what I can do. There are only so many tenure track jobs in the Chicagoland area. So I don't know if you know where NIU is, Cynthia, but it's in DeKalb, which is an hour away.
My brother went there.
Yeah. So like everything was an option for me, but it had to be within the state of Illinois. So I have 2 teenage kids. I think you remember that or know that. They're in middle school and high school. I have a partner who has a job in the city of Chicago. It's not transferable. He can't work from somewhere else. I mean, right now, maybe he can, but under normal circumstances, he can't. So for that reason, I chose it, and there's a lot of literature out there about adjunct and contingent faculty being women and people of color and being limited for reasons like that, like family. A lot of women who feel like they have to take these kinds of roles so that they can either teach just 1 or 2 classes and do other things that are priorities for them, or I think often in many cases, people of color aren't valued in the same way. Their research isn't valued in the same way. Their experience isn't valued in the same way. So they end up in roles like that. So I can't really say what you should want. I mean, I would prefer a tenure track job, but and that's what I'm I'm looking for, but at the same time, I've been an admin for 20 years. Like if I go back to that, it wouldn't be the end of the world for me either. So I'm probably different in that way from other people, is that I don't see it as like, you know, the end of the world for me if I do go back to an administrative role.
If I can just pop in a little bit and say, you know, as you're thinking about applying for faculty jobs, I mean, one, I think it's really important to think about what type of position do you think you thrive in, right? What type of environment, what type of institutional type, you know, what are you looking for? And then from that, kind of spread it out a little bit, right? Okay, if I don't get this, then what's the next step? If I don't get that, what's that next step and everything, right? So like for me, I was primarily interested in being at a research one institution. For me, research was really important, and it's something that I love to do. And I know this is being recorded, but I don't love teaching, right? I don't feel like teaching ever comes as naturally to me as it does for some other people. I like it. I especially like it if I like the students and I like the topic, but like, it's not like my passion, right? Where some people are like, I love to teach. And I'm like, it's all right, I'll do it. I really like the research, right? I like being that aspect of it. And so for me, it was like, okay, R1. All right. Okay. If I don't get R1, then I'm also going to apply for R2, right? Obviously, I also taught for some, apply to some teaching institutions because at that point, I was like, I just need a job. Right. And my number one goal was to get a faculty job. My next step would have been some of the visiting assistant professors, right? Or the clinical position, things like that. But if you're looking for a job, let's say you want a job that starts, you know, in like August 2022, you actually start looking for the jobs and applying for them August 2021. Okay, especially for like the tenure track ones. Those are the ones that come out probably a little bit earlier. And then as things kind of open up and things start to change and shift, then more and more will come out, right? Like the clinical position or the professors of practice. Like if you're like, you know what, I love to teach and I love to really think about, really make the connection between practice and teaching in the classroom, being a professor of practice is great, right? You get to do a little bit of everything, right? A little bit of that too. And then, you know, for me, it was also like, as I was applying, I knew that as the spring came along, and if I didn't get a faculty job, I would start looking more at like postdocs, right? Visiting professorships. I would start looking at administrative positions, things like that. So I think to a certain extent, if your interest is being a tenure track faculty member, start applying right away, right? When you see it and you're interested in it, start applying. I was also in a situation different from Norma where, I mean, I was pretty open to going anywhere. And I was like, I'll go anywhere, anybody who will take me at any institution. And so, you know, some of those things that you have to also decide on your own, how do you figure out the parameters for your search?
Thank you.
And then anyone else? The floor is open for sure.
Can I ask a question?
You're allowed, I guess. You could, maybe one.
Don't let Dimitri ask any questions.
He's gonna give you the hardest one and you're probably ahead all night, so good luck.
So I'm curious what you all as faculty do for fun. You know, I know earlier we talked about like the things you like about your job, and I appreciate everything you said, Dr. Yao, about not loving teaching, like being good at it. You could do it, but like you really enjoy. But I'm just curious, you know, sometimes I wonder what other faculty do for fun, because I feel like my life is boring. So any inspiration, things you do for fun, that, and we're not talking about like working out or like other things you do like that are healthy, like, you know, counseling and all that, like all that's great. But like, what do you do for like pure fun? Like not like health and wellness, but like just fun. That makes sense.
But what
not
if that,
poo-pooing health and wellness, that's important too, but you know what I mean.
no, but I that is my fun, is I like to work out with my girlfriends, and that's what I've missed, is I can't work out with them. But that's my fun, Dimitri. That's all the fun, that's all the fun I'm allowed as the mom of two teenagers.
Right. I've embraced things that you can like finish, right? Because a lot of times, like in the faculty route, like you've got so many projects going that it literally sometimes takes months, sometimes years for something to get done. So like as simple as like, you know, puzzles, like anytime my kids get Legos, I'm the one that they just play with it. But I love putting together like Legos because you got, first of all, there's directions, which is really beautiful. Like you don't have to guess it. And then like you have something tangible that's done that you can hold up, and now it lasts like 3 minutes. But yeah, so anything that's like, you know, cooking, puzzles, games, anything that like you can complete and just look back, even if it's like after a beer, you know, back down in Urbana when I had the house, like cutting the grass. I just love yard work because you could just look back and be like, I did this. Now it doesn't look great, but I got it done. So that is what I've embraced, is like things that you can just complete, look back and enjoy. So cooking's been big since the pandemic, just because we can't go anywhere. So yeah.
Pre-pandemic, I would have said I love to travel, especially international travel, as much as I could. And obviously right now that's at a pause for a while actually now and everything. What I learned to kind of embrace, especially during the pandemic, because what I found myself doing is that especially working from home, I could work all the time. And it got to a point where I was literally working all the time. I'm like, well, there's not really anything else to do. And it's only 6 o'clock. So I mean, I guess I can go check email and reply to the ones that are sitting there and everything, which is not good, right? So so I also like things that you can complete because I feel like there's a lot of things in my life that are very incomplete, especially professionally. I like to bake. I like to bake a lot because I have to fully concentrate. And so I can't worry about emails. I can't worry about people calling me, whatever and stuff. So I like to bake because there's always a product that everybody's happy about. And one of the smartest things I did several weeks ago was I found a new recipe for cinnamon rolls. And you know, if anybody's ever made cinnamon rolls, whether from scratch or from like a tube or whatever, after they get cold, they get super hard, but these don't. And I froze them. I froze them individually with individual little packets of cream cheese frosting. And so sometimes, like if I have late night meetings like this, I'm like, oh, I was like, let me go defrost one cinnamon roll and one packet of cream cheese frosting. Smartest thing I ever did. My old me did for me right now. So it's the King Arthur baking. So look for like King Arthur baking, pillowy soft cinnamon rolls. It is the best. I like to listen to podcasts, especially while I'm baking or if I'm like prepping foods or whatever on the weekends. I watch a lot of Netflix. I watch Netflix. I watch Amazon Prime. I watch Hulu. I watch HBO Max, right? It's getting to a point where I'm like running out of things to watch and I'm like, this is too much. I also started playing the ukulele starting last spring because some friends of mine from grad school were like, let's pick it up again. Let's play. I'm like, all right, I haven't played in forever, but all right. So we would get together and we had like our little jam sessions. The only song we could play pretty well was The Lion Sleeps Tonight because it's only 2 chords. But doing that is like kind of fun because I'm like, oh, I mean, like I'm kind of bad at this, but nobody cares, right? So yeah, that's kind of it. I'll visit my family, and honestly, the nice thing about moving here to South Carolina is that my family's only 3 hours away in Savannah, Georgia. So I'll go there, so it's easy to drive, do all of that and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I actually really had this problem, especially in grad school. People would ask me, "What are your hobbies?" and I couldn't give an answer. I literally could not give an answer because I was like, I just work all the time and stuff. So I've been trying really hard to think about like, what are my hobbies and what are things I can talk about? So those are a few of the things that I picked up.
All right, so this should be everyone. We might just have a couple people trickle through. I know there's some folks who wanted to go back and forth, but we've had a larger conversation with Dr. Baber facilitating higher education in general. And so this is a space really to focus on the staff experience. So all of us are at different points in our careers. Maybe we're in school, maybe we're thinking about going into a student affairs type position or a staff position within higher education. And so this is a space really to chat with our panelists, to learn from their experiences, but to get their insight as well. So any and all questions are open, and feel free to panelists share some of your experiences or maybe some of your takeaways, and then feel free to use the chat feature or unmute yourself and ask questions.
Hello, my name's Alyssa. I go by she, her pronouns. So I'm actually starting the program in the fall, part-time, while I work full-time. So if any of the panelists have any advice to navigate that sphere, I would very much enjoy that because it's been 3 years since I've been out of undergrad. So, you know, it's going to be an experience. I'm excited.
Well, first off, congratulations. So congratulations for going back to school and then obviously working full time. And Dr. Paige, I remember those days when you were navigating the PhD program and work. I don't know how you did it with the PhD program, but I'm actually currently in a program too right now. I'm in a part-time program at Cornell Law School for their Master's in Legal Studies. So, so it's extremely challenging. I would say definitely, prioritize your well-being, especially in the times that we're in, and also schedule everything around coursework and work around like your well-being. And the only reason why I say that is because when I was in graduate school and was having like 2-3 assistantships or like other positions in addition to going to school full-time, it kind of felt like full-time work, and I burned out pretty quickly. So you definitely at all costs want to avoid burnout. So I think definitely just prioritizing your well-being and then working, work and school around that. I think you'll be in the program part-time. It's definitely a good choice if you're going to continue working full-time. And also just don't be afraid to like tap into your own experiences professionally into the classroom, because I found that when I was in my program at Loyola, that the people who contributed like really significantly to the experience were people who already had that full-time work experience. So I know you talked about kind of being nervous about being 3 years out. I think that's only just going to make your experience even richer, because you're going to have so much more experiences and knowledge and information to bring to the program. So just because you're in the classroom with a full-time student and you being part-time, like just don't be afraid to kind of tap into that and really utilize that to enhance your experience, as well as provide some insight to other folks too.
Thank you.
I think too, so not everything has to be perfect, it just has to be good enough, right? And so figuring out what your good enough is and what your best work that day is and what you feel good about submitting that day for your assignments, or how deeply you read that day for it's about just, it doesn't have to be perfect every time. And sometimes that's really hard to let go, but it will still be okay.
I would also add that I did, like Anthony was sharing, I did part-time for school as well. And I still got it done in 4 years. But I think like the deal is this, and I think there are doc students in this space, or who are going to be doc students soon. I had to have conversations with my supervisor. So before I even applied, I was like, this is something that I want to do for my professional development. What kind of support can I expect from you up front? And like, where can we give or take, right? So some of my classes in the higher ed program would start at 4:30. So I, got the okay from my supervisor to head out at 3:45 so that I can go grab me some food and then go to class and like be downtown forever and then go home and go to sleep. So it's just about like having honest conversations with your supervisor so that you can get the support that you need. I also, at the very end of coursework, writing for me is hard. It's not an easy feat at all. And so there was a class on preparing your proposal, and it was meant to be like a writing circle with other doc students, but it was in the middle of the day. And I was like, look, if you said you was going to support me, so I'm going to ask that I can take this one class out of the 4 years, like, you know what I'm saying, out of the 2.5 years that I've been here. I really need to take this class so that I can accelerate and get this dissertation done. And so I got that approved. And again, like, your reputation matters. Like what you do, allows people to be comfortable in giving you the space in the room. So I really appreciate that. And that was a game changer for me, because I got things knocked out. And then the last thing that I'll say is, as a part-time student, get creative with your course requirements. So for me, I wasn't a full-time doc student, but I still wanted the research experience. So what I did for my electives, I did a research assistant role with Dr. Kelly, and we actually created work, presented at ASH. Like, I got the whole experience, and our paper got published right before I finished the program. And then I also used another bit of my credit to be a teaching assistant. So I worked with Dr. Chang, and I got to co-instruct a class, and we had a conversation about what I wanted to get out of it. And so that changed the game for me, and I got credit for it. So think about how, when you volunteer or show up to do these extra projects, how can you get the credit for it so that you are also checking something off the list?
Thank you all.
Thank you for all those really good responses. We have a couple of more questions over here in the chat that I'm gonna go ahead and share. So one of them is, what do you think the best entry-level position to go into when looking for work in student affairs is? Some people say residence life, some say admissions. What do you suggest?
Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say, look, it's not really about what is the best job. It's about what are you willing to do, and like, is it in alignment with who you are? So if you hate being a policy enforcer, do not do residence life, because though you get the free housing, you're gonna be mad when you're on call every other week or whatever their schedule is set up as, right? So if you don't like doing that, like, don't force a job on yourself. There are other opportunities. So I would say, like, it's about where your passion is, or where you're willing to grow in. So maybe you do want to grow in policy enforcement and things of that nature. So maybe you do explore residence life. So I don't think it's like one is better than the other. Yeah, would love to hear from the other panel members on that.
Just to build off of that, I knew going into my job search after grad school that I did not want to do residence life, yet everybody was hiring for residence life positions. So it made looking for a job harder. But that was just for me something that I knew coming into the grad program, I would say that I knew, because I already had experience working in res life, that I did not want to do that. And I stayed true to that and just was very optimistic and hopeful that other types of positions would open up that were more towards the work I was passionate about, which was diversity and inclusion, which fortunately landed me into the SDMA office and then working in an LGBTQ resource center. So there really isn't a hierarchy. It's really just, as Paige mentioned, like, where's your passion and where are you going to be able to thrive in? Or where can you grow in?
And I think too, I know Anthony talked a bit in the larger session, like, you've got to be realistic about the financial implications of your choices. And so, you know, you might need to take some of those things into consideration. And I always tell people with entry-level jobs in student affairs, just be sure that you're continuing to take advantage of opportunities that help grow skill sets that you could talk about for when you're ready to leave that job. So don't necessarily get stuck doing the same thing for 7 years with no increasing responsibilities. It gets a little bit hard to get hired into the next position when you kind of have the same resume and you can't talk about increasing responsibility over the years. But if you can talk about some of those things, then when you are ready to start looking for a new job or transition to a new job or a new opportunity, you're able to talk about some of those things and show that you were able to kind of build on your experiences and continue advancing in whatever circumstance you had to be in at whatever time.
In case we don't get a specific res life question, I will also say this: if you do go into residence life, like, strategize on how to stack your coins, y'all, because I will say that the first 2 years of my professional experience were amazing and beautiful. I would say that's the first time that I experienced financial security. But I also wasn't strategic about how to set myself up once I left. And I didn't know that all of a sudden I was gonna feel the call to shift out of res life. Like, leadership changed and I was like, I need to be doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what that means. And I bounced, but then I was like, oh, I have to buy a bed. I have to pay bills. I have to pay back loans. And so the only thing I wish I would have did a little bit better, there's still no full regrets, was that I stacked my coin just a little bit. And if you are in residence life, there are additional projects that you can do to set yourself up to get out of residence life, so you don't feel pigeonholed, like, in the long run. So.
Awesome. So we have another question in the chat, and it says, what tips would you give to a student who is now an undergrad, soon to be grad student, who will be leaving home and is thinking about being in the higher education field?
I always tell this to students, anybody who wants to go to grad school, not just higher ed specifically, but like, with graduate school, the only major difference I would say, I mean, there's a lot of differences compared to your undergrad experience, but like, only do a program unless you're like 100% committed to doing it, because it is time and money that you're investing into your education experience. And so that's part of the reason why I didn't go into higher ed right after my undergrad experience, because I was like 90% there, but I wasn't 100% like I want to do higher education. And so that experience abroad for that year that I wasn't in school really confirmed that for me. So I would just say, and I always recommend this to any student considering grad school, is to like go when you're 100% invested, because it is going to be an investment of your time and your money, and money is a huge thing we just talked about. So just think about that before committing to a program. Oh, and get money too, especially if you're like somebody from a diverse background, because that was another piece of advice a mentor gave me, is that because I was queer and a person of color and I had all this experience, like I should not pay for my grad experience, and I didn't. So I still, to this day, even in my Cornell program, I'm not paying for the program because I've worked there and I've been able to tap into that benefit as an employee there.
I think too, if you've got the time as an undergraduate student, like people love to do informational interview. I get people who want to come do an informational interview with me all the time and want to just sit and talk about what I do. And it's 30 minutes of my time. They're nothing, no big expectation beyond either end, other than a student wants to talk to me about my job because they might want to do it someday. And so if you are sort of strategizing about what your undergraduate time looks like, you've got a handful of years, find people whose jobs you think sound cool and ask them if they'll talk to you for half an hour about their job. And I think you will find most people will be willing to do that.
I would also encourage you to look for mentorship programs that you can be a part of. So there's the NUF program, that's for undergrad students who are interested or know that they want to do student affairs. So it can be a mixture of both. You get like a formal mentor. Sometimes there's internships that are connected. Wait, NUF does. No, you still have to apply for internship, right? That's not guaranteed. So you go into the program, you get a mentor, but then there's also access to internship opportunities where you can actually go to an institution and learn more about residence life, or learn more about multicultural affairs work, student conduct, et cetera, et cetera. So I would encourage you to look into that. NUF is NUFP, so NASPA is an organization for higher ed folks. So it's like an acronym within an acronym, but NASPA Undergraduate Fellowship Program. And then ACPA is another like national higher ed professional organization. And I can't remember the name of their equivalent. I think Hilary is like doing a quick search, but there is an equivalent program for undergrad students as well. But oh yeah, she's putting it in the chat, like in terms of the names of the organization. When we move on to other questions, I'll check what the name of the ACPA equivalent is to NUF, and I'll put that in. But definitely get involved with those types of things. And if you don't get to be a part of those programs at the current institution you're a part of, see if they have any internship opportunities for you. Because internship means like, it may not be paid, but there can be some time for you to actually get acclimated with the kind of work that's being done.
Awesome. And so we have, this actually might be our last question before we go back to the main room. But what would you recommend to folks who are struggling to find ways to establish themselves in the field?
Okay, I'm gonna take this one, or start it off, but and I don't know where this person is at, like if they're an undergrad or if they're in grad school or if they're in the doc program, but I think this is where, again, like putting yourself out there and finding faculty mentors who you just vibe with, right? Like, who are your scholarly crushes? And, learn more about the research they're doing. See if they have a research group that you can become a part of. You can also reach out to supervisors or folks who work in the field to be like, hey, like, are you presenting at a national conference? And are there particular things that you're passionate about in which you can then collaborate with another professional who is doing similar work? And that's putting yourself out in the field, right? Like getting to know people and see if you're, again, depending on where you're at, if you are currently in the master's program, at least here at Loyola, I know that there are specific fundings set aside for students that you can apply for from the School of Education. And you can get some funding that can help you to go present at that particular conference. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there and get your collaboration on. And that also allows you to learn, like, what it is to apply, like submit something for, whether it be a grant, but also like a program proposal or an IRB, or there's just so many things that you can learn when you decide to like link up with someone and the work that they are currently doing. And then when you approach that person, make sure that you've done your homework. So, you know, say, hey, these are the specific things that I like that you do. Here are the areas that I'm interested in. I'm wondering if there's room here for collaboration. And that's how it goes. And if you're unsure how to do that as well, then find a mentor who can coach you up on how to prepare for like making that ask, or maybe your mentor can make the introduction for you. So don't be shy. Like you can connect the dots and be like, Doctora, I know, or Doctora Chang, right? She's my favorite, and she was my dissertation chair. Hey, there's this person that I think you might know. Like, do you think you might, you know, do an introduction for us, because my research is focusing on women of color. And so those are ways that you can kind of connect dots.
Awesome, thank you. We are actually about to go to the main room. So if you want to leave and head out to the main room, we just have a few closing up options and then some opportunity for you to network further if you want.
Thank you to everyone for coming tonight. We really appreciate you joining us. We hope it was a rich, wonderful conversation. I know I enjoyed myself and I learned a lot. So first, thank you to our attendees. Next, I really want to say thank you to our speakers for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate your time, your expertise. I know that the HESA board, we were taking notes during the conversation, and we have a lot of great quotes. So we'll definitely pass those along to you as we were live tweeting, as we learned a lot. So, and last, I really want to say thank you to my HESA team for organizing tonight. There's been a lot of love and work put into this, so thank you all so much. And hopefully, there wasn't as many technology issues, so that was a win. I was making a joke before tonight that's saying that, gosh, if this was in person, so much easier that we can just like kind of flub along if there's an issue, because it's totally fine because we're in person. So thank you all for humoring us as we go. As a final plug for folks that might not be formally part of the Loyola community, we just want to let you know, so our program, the higher education program at Loyola, we have a master's and a PhD program. And so you've heard a little bit about what the experience is like, what the community is like, but we encourage you to check out our website, HESALoyola.org. We also link over to the program's website, so if you're interested in looking at any of the programmatic approaches, and then looking at possibly applying and joining our community formally, it'll be wonderful. Be sure to follow us on our socials, as we hope this is the first of many events moving forward in the years to come. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and we will follow up with a link to the webinar so you can get both sides of the conversation, and to share with anyone else that might have been interested to come tonight that were unable. So thank you so much.